The portrait hit the floor before anyone in the room dared breathe.
Remove them. There is one more. Who is she? She is Lady Zephyra Vespera, Your Grace.
The portrait hit the floor before anyone in the room dared breathe. Not because Alaric Graves, the 6th Duke of Velmore, had thrown it. He was too controlled for that, too cold. He had simply released it from his fingers, the way a man releases something that no longer interests him, and the gilt frame had struck the marble with a sound like a verdict. "Remove them," he said. His advisor, Lord Cretan, gestured quickly to the attendants. One by one, the painted faces of England's most eligible daughters were gathered from the long table. Lady Priscilla of the Northern Counties, the Honourable Miss Fauntleroy, the Marchioness of Dravenport's youngest daughter. 7 portraits in total, each one representing a family that had spent months and considerable coin ensuring their daughter's likeness was rendered at its most flattering. All dismissed in under 4 minutes. Alaric stood at the window of his palace study with his back to the room, hands clasped behind him, staring out at the iron-grey sky above Velmore's capital. He was 34 years old and looked, in that moment, like a man who had decided something permanent about the world and found it unsatisfying. "There is one more," Cretan said carefully. "I said remove them. This one arrived differently, Your Grace." A pause. It was not submitted through the formal registry. It came in a sealed envelope addressed to you personally, with no family crest and no accompanying letter. Alaric did not turn around. "Then burn it." Cretan did not burn it. He set it on the edge of the table, a small canvas, perhaps 12 inches across, unframed, wrapped in plain brown cloth, and quietly withdrew to stand near the door. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Alaric turned. He crossed to the table because it was there, and he was a man who finished what he started. He pulled the cloth away with 2 fingers, expecting nothing. He found her. She was not posed the way the others had been posed. Chin lifted, expression carefully arranged to project refinement and breeding. She was caught mid-turn, as though the painter had captured her at an unguarded moment. Her dark hair was loose at one side, her lips parted slightly, and her eyes, even in paint, held something that did not look like obedience. There was a quality to her expression that Alaric could not immediately name. Not defiance exactly, not vulnerability, something in between. The look of a woman who had already seen the worst, the world intended for her and had not broken under it. He stared at the portrait for 47 seconds. Cretan counted. He had served this man for 11 years. He had learned to count the silences. "Who is she?" Alaric said. Not a question. A demand delivered quietly. "Lady Zephyra Vespera, daughter of the late Earl of Ashville, 26 years of age. She manages what remains of her father's estate in the northern province. It has been considerably reduced since his passing. She has declined 3 formal introductions in the past 2 years, and is not registered with the Royal Matching Council." "Why not register?" "She refused." A beat of silence. "She refused," Alaric repeated, and something shifted in his expression. Something slight, almost imperceptible, the way a crack appears in stone before it widens. "Yes, Your Grace," apparently quite firmly. Alaric looked at the portrait again, at the eyes that had no interest in performing anything for anyone, at the mouth that looked as though it had said difficult, true things, and would say them again. "Bring her to my palace," he said. Cretan straightened. "Your Grace, tonight, if possible. Tomorrow morning, if the roads require it." He set the portrait down on the table, face up, and moved toward the door. "She is not to be frightened. She is not to be forced. But she is to come." He paused at the threshold with one hand on the frame. "And find out who painted it," he said quietly, "and why was it sent without a name?" Then he was gone, and Cretan stood alone in the room with the portrait of a woman who had refused to be registered and the knowledge that the ruthless Duke of Velmore, the man who had not looked twice at any living woman in 4 years, had just issued a command on the strength of 12 square inches of painted canvas. He looked down at the portrait. The woman in it looked back at him with those steady, unperformable eyes. Cretan thought, not for the first time in his career, that things were about to become very complicated. 300 miles north, Zephyra Vespera was standing in a cold kitchen arguing with the estate ledger. The numbers had not improved since yesterday. They had, in fact, worsened slightly, because yesterday she had not yet factored in the cost of repairing the east wall before winter arrived, and took it down entirely. She pressed 2 fingers to the space between her brows and breathed. She was not a woman who panicked. She had learned that lesson at 17 when her father's debts had first revealed themselves and she had sat in this same kitchen. Warmer then, better staffed then, and understood that panic was simply an expensive emotion she could not afford. So she did not panic now. She did the sums again. The answer was the same. Without an influx of funds before the first frost, Ashvale would lose the East Wing. And without the East Wing, the tenant farmers who sheltered there through winter would have nowhere to go. And that was not something she was willing to allow. My lady. Her housekeeper, Marin, appeared in the doorway with an expression that Zephyra recognized immediately. The controlled face of a woman delivering news she wasn't sure how to frame. There is a man at the gate, Marin said. He carries the seal of the Duke of Velmore. Zephyra set the ledger down slowly. Velmore, she repeated. Yes, my lady. He says he carries a personal message from His Grace and requests an audience. Zephyra was quiet for a moment. She knew the name Alaric Graves the way everyone in England knew it. The way you knew the name of a storm before it arrived. The Ruthless Duke, youngest man ever appointed commander of the Royal Military Council. Responsible for ending the Barrack Rebellion in 11 days when his predecessors had failed to do so in 11 months. Unmarried by choice, reportedly unmovable on the subject, and known in political circles for a particular brand of cold precision that men respected and feared in equal measure. She had also heard, through the quieter channels that women used to share information men thought they weren't sharing, that he had loved someone once, that something had happened, that he had come back from it changed in a way that no one fully described but everyone understood. She did not know what any of that had to do with her. Show him in, she said. The envoy was a neat, composed man in Velmore livery, who delivered his message with professional courtesy and no visible awareness of how strange it was. The Duke of Velmore requested the pleasure of Lady Zephyra Vespera's company at the palace, at her earliest convenience, in connection with a matter of mutual interest. Zephyra read the sealed letter 3 times. Mutual interest. As though she and the ruthless Duke of Velmore shared anything. Please thank His Grace, she said, and inform him that I am not available. The envoy blinked. Barely. But she caught it. My lady, he said with careful diplomacy. The Duke's invitation is... An invitation, Zephyra said pleasantly, which means I am free to decline it. Good evening. She walked out of the room before he could reframe it. Behind her, she heard Marin's sharp intake of breath, the sound of a woman who understood exactly what it meant to refuse a duke's summons and was not certain her mistress did. Zephyra understood perfectly. She simply had a different calculation running in her head. The east wall, the tenant farmers, the ledger that didn't balance. She had 26 years of experience watching powerful men treat her family as a resource to be managed, and she had decided quite early that the most powerful thing a woman in her position could do was to be consistently, elegantly, immovably herself. If the Duke of Velmore wanted something from her, he would need to explain what it was and why she should care. She went back to the ledger. She did not sleep particularly well that night, but she told herself that was because of the east wall. Alaric received her refusal the following morning. He read it twice, set it down. Picked it up and read it a 3rd time, which was not something he did with correspondence. She declined, he said. Yes, Your Grace. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, a November wind moved through the palace gardens, stripping the last of the leaves from the oaks his grandmother had planted 40 years ago. He watched them fall. She didn't even ask what the matter of mutual interest was, he said. No, Your Grace. She did not. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh. It was too brief and too controlled for that, but something moved across his face, not irritation. Something closer to interest, sharp and genuine, the kind he hadn't felt in a considerable time. Send Cretan to her estate, he said. Not another envoy, Cretan himself. And the message? No message, just Cretan. He returned to the window. She'll talk to him. She's clever enough to know the difference between an errand boy and a conversation. He was right. Zephyra did talk to Cretan, because Cretan arrived without ceremony, introduced himself as the Duke's chief advisor rather than his messenger, and sat down across from her at the kitchen table, as though he were there for a genuine discussion rather than a performance of authority. She respected that. She also noticed that he looked briefly and involuntarily, at the ledger on the table before she closed it, and that he did not pretend he hadn't seen it. "The Duke," Cretan said carefully, "does not issue invitations in the way that most men of his position issue invitations." "I know," Zephyra said, "which is why I was surprised he framed it as one." Cretan looked at her steadily. "He framed it as one because he chose to. A pause." "He saw your portrait," Cretan said. Zephyra went very still. "I didn't send a portrait," she said. "No," Cretan agreed. "Someone did, on your behalf. We do not yet know who. But His Grace was affected by it." Zephyra was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the wind pushed against the kitchen window. The east wall, somewhere beyond the garden, groaned in response. "I am not looking for a powerful patron," she said at last, her voice level and clear. "And I am not interested in being summoned the way men summon useful things." "You would not be summoned," Cretan said. "You would be welcomed. Those are not always different things." He looked at her with something that might have been approved. "No," he admitted. "They are not, but in this case, I believe they are." He folded his hands on the table. "Lady Zephyra, I have served the Duke of Velmore for 11 years. In that time, I have watched him dismiss portraits, letters, introductions, and entreaties from nearly every eligible family in England. He looked at your portrait for 47 seconds and said, 'Bring her to my palace.'" He paused. "That has never happened before." Zephyra held his gaze. Her own expression gave nothing away, which cost her something because beneath it, her pulse had quickened in a way she found inconvenient. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because," Cretan said simply, "you deserve an honest account." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the closed ledger. Then she looked at the window, beyond which the east wall was waiting for winter with no particular confidence. "I will come," she said, "but I will come on my own terms. I will not be presented. I will not perform. And if I choose to leave, I will leave." Crushan nodded. "His Grace anticipated that condition," he said. "He agreed to it before I arrived. That surprised her. She didn't show it. Then I will need 3 days to arrange the estate," she said. "Of course." She saw him to the door herself, which was not strictly proper for a woman of her station receiving an official visitor. She did it anyway. After he left, she stood in the doorway for a moment, watching the gray sky, and thought about a man who had looked at her portrait for 47 seconds and decided that mattered. She also thought about who had sent that portrait without her name on it. That question sat in her chest like a coal, quietly burning. She arrived at Velmore on a Thursday, 2 days later than planned because the road through Keswick flooded and she refused to be carried in a sedan chair like cargo. She rode the last 12 miles in the rain. She arrived at the palace gates with damp hair, mud on her traveling cloak, and the kind of expression that dared anyone to comment on either. Alaric was not at the gates to receive her. She had expected that. Men like him did not wait at gates. What she had not expected was to turn a corner inside the palace's eastern corridor, being led by a steward she'd just met, and walk directly into the Duke himself. He was not where he was supposed to be. Later, she would suspect he had arranged it. He was coming from the direction of the library, a document in his hand, apparently mid-thought, and then he stopped. And she stopped, and for a moment they simply looked at each other in the corridor with a torch burning in its bracket between them. He was taller than she'd expected, darker. The paintings in the illustrated papers hadn't captured the quality of his stillness. The way he occupied space without filling it with noise or motion, simply stood and was entirely present in a way that made the air feel different around him. And he looked at her exactly the way he must have looked at the portrait. Not with admiration, exactly. Not with want, exactly. With something more unnerving than either, with attention. The full, focused, unhurried attention of a man who had decided something was worth understanding and intended to do so thoroughly. "You rode in the rain," he said. "The road flooded," she said. "I sent a carriage. I prefer to ride." A beat of silence. His eyes moved briefly to the mud on her cloak, then back to her face. "You're not what I expected," he said. "I imagine not," she said. Portraits are rarely accurate. Something happened in his expression, the smallest possible shift, barely a shadow. But she was watching carefully, and she caught it. "No," he said quietly. "In your case it was considerably less so." She held his gaze, did not look away, did not soften. "Your Grace," she said evenly, "I was told I would be welcomed. I was also told I would not be presented or performed. If this corridor is the beginning of an audition, I'd like to know now so I can save us both the time." He looked at her for a long moment. "It's not," he said. "Good." "Dinner is at 7, he said. "You have time to rest." I don't need to rest. He almost smiled. She was almost certain of it. Then the library is at the end of the west corridor, he said. The collection is adequate. He moved past her then, document in hand, and she turned to watch him go, because she was a woman who liked to understand what was behind her as clearly as what was in front. He did not look back, but his steps slowed, just slightly, just for a fraction of a second, as though some part of him was debating it. Then he rounded the corner and was gone. Sapphira turned back to the waiting steward, who had witnessed all of this with the controlled expression of a palace employee who had learned not to react to extraordinary things. "The library," she said. "Please." She walked toward it with her spine straight, and her pulse doing something she refused to examine closely. She was here. He was real. The portrait, the corridor, the 47 seconds. All of it had led to this palace and this moment, and a man whose eyes held the same quality as hers. The quality of someone who had already seen the worst the world intended and had not broken under it. She was not sure what to do with that recognition. She was not sure she was ready for what it meant. Dinner that first evening was not a performance. That was the first thing that surprised her. There were 8 guests in total. Not the sweeping formal banquet she'd braced herself for, but a smaller gathering in one of the palace's side dining rooms, the kind with a fire and mismatched candlesticks, and the general atmosphere of a room that was actually used, rather than displayed. The guests were Cretan, 2 of Alaric's military advisors, a visiting scholar from the Velmore Academy, the scholar's wife, and Lord Dorian Blackwell, Marquis of Castern, who arrived last, precisely on time, with the practiced ease of a man who understood that timing was a form of power. Sapphira noticed Dorian immediately. She noticed him because he was handsome in an obvious, deliberate way, the kind of handsome that understood its own effect and deployed it, and because he sat across from her and directed his first 3 remarks entirely to her, as though no one else at the table warranted the effort. "Lady Sapphira," he said, his smile warm and interested, "I understand you managed the Ashvale estate through your father's passing entirely on your own. That is remarkable for a woman of your age." "Thank you," she said pleasantly, "and for a woman of any age, I would think." Dorian's smile widened. "Of course, I only meant—" "I know what you meant," she said, still pleasant. It was a compliment with a small cage built into it. Most are. A short silence. Then Dorian laughed. Genuinely, she thought. "You are direct," he said. "It saves time." She was aware in her peripheral vision that Alaric had stopped cutting his meat. She did not look at him. She held Dorian's gaze and kept her expression open and unimpressed in equal measure. "I've heard Ashvale's East Wing is in need of significant repair," Dorian said, his tone shifting, still warm, but with something underneath it now, something she didn't quite trust. "I have holdings near the northern province. If you ever need a recommendation for a reliable builder, I'd be glad to help." "That's very kind," she said. "I'll manage." "You always do, I imagine." "I will try." She finally looked at Alaric. He was looking at her already, not at Dorian, not at the conversation, at her, with an expression that was flat and controlled, and she felt it like a change in pressure, very, very focused. She held his gaze for one moment. Then she reached for her wine glass and turned back to the scholar's wife, who had been waiting patiently to ask about the northern province's textile traditions, and spent the next 20 minutes having the most genuinely pleasant conversation she'd had in months. Alaric said almost nothing for the remainder of dinner. Afterward, when the guests had dispersed, and Cretan was shepherding the military advisors toward the study for the evening debrief, Sapphira found herself briefly alone in the corridor outside the dining room. Alaric appeared behind her. "Dorian Blackwell is a man who collects things," he said quietly. She turned. He was closer than she'd expected. Not improper, but close enough that she could see the particular quality of his expression in the torchlight. Something controlled and something else underneath it. "I noticed," she said. "He saw you arrive," Alaric said. "He requested a seat at dinner." "And you allowed it." "I was curious," he said, "whether he'd try. And now that you know he did?" He looked at her for a moment. "Now I know he'll try again," he said. There was something in his voice, not warning, not possessiveness, not yet. Something more like information delivered with precision, as though he was telling her something important and trusting her to understand its weight. "I can manage Lord Dorian," she said. "I know you can," he said. And there was something in those 4 words, something quiet and absolute, that she carried with her all the way to her chamber. She sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, and thought about a man who looked at her like she was worth understanding. She thought about a portrait she hadn't sent. She thought about Dorian's offer regarding the east wall. Too convenient, too specific, the kind of offer that required knowing things he shouldn't know. She thought about all of it, arranged like pieces on a board she hadn't agreed to play. Then she lay back and closed her eyes and told herself that tomorrow she would be careful. She was not entirely sure she believed it. The portrait's sender revealed itself on the fourth morning. Zephyra found the answer in the last place she expected. A letter slipped beneath her chamber door before dawn, written in a hand she recognized immediately. Small, precise, slightly tilted to the left. The hand of a woman who had learned to write in secret because the tutor her father hired had been instructed to teach her brothers only. Her aunt, Lady Mira Vespera. The letter was short, 3 paragraphs. The kind of letter a woman writes when she has decided to do something irreversible and wants the person most affected to understand why. I painted it from memory, the letter read. I painted it because I watched you spend 4 years holding that estate together with your bare hands while the world looked through you as though you were furniture. I sent it because I know who Alaric Graves is beneath what they call him. His mother was my dearest friend before she died. He is not what they say. He is what they don't say. I did not ask your permission because you would have refused. Forgive me if you must, but live, Zephyra. Please, simply live. She read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and held it in her hands for a long moment, sitting on the window seat with the early gray light coming in, and the palace gardens below her still and quiet. Her aunt had known his mother, had known him, not his title, not his reputation, but something underneath it, had looked at the portrait of a man the world called Ruthless, and seen someone worth trusting with the most stubborn, most difficult, most irreplaceable person in her life. Zephyra pressed the letter against her chest. She did not cry. She had not cried since her father's funeral, and she did not intend to start now over a letter that had broken something open in her chest without warning. She got dressed. She went to the library. She pulled out 3 books she had no intention of reading, and stared at the fire, and thought about a woman who had painted her from memory because she believed in something. Alaric found her there an hour later. He didn't announce himself. He simply appeared in the doorway, still in his riding clothes, which meant he had been out since before she came downstairs, which meant he rose earlier than even she did, and stopped when he saw her face. She had not arranged her expression in time. He saw something. She knew he saw it by the way his body changed. Not dramatically, not with any obvious display, but the quality of his stillness shifted. He moved into the room and sat in the chair across from her, and did not ask what was wrong. He simply waited. She looked at him. "My aunt sent the portrait," she said. "I know," he said. "Cretan found the provenance yesterday evening. Lady Mira Vespera, your father's sister. She trained under a painter in Florence in her youth." He paused. "I was going to tell you this morning." "Did you know she knew your mother?" Something crossed his face. Brief, significant. "I suspected," he said quietly. "My mother spoke of a woman named Mira. She never gave a surname. After she died, I stopped asking." He looked at the fire. "How is she?" "Stubborn," Zephyra said. "Brilliant. Impossible." Her voice did something at the end of that sentence that she didn't entirely control. "She did this without telling me." "Yes." She had no right. "No," he agreed. And then quietly, "I'm glad she did it anyway." Zephyra looked at him. He was looking at the fire, which gave her a moment to look at him without performing anything. To look at the line of his jaw and the way his hands rested on the chair arms, not tense, not idle, simply present, and the slight shadow beneath his eyes that said he also had not slept particularly well. "Why did you agree to my conditions?" she said. "Before Cretan even arrived, you agreed that I could leave whenever I chose." He was quiet for a moment. "Because the alternative," he said carefully, "was having you here under duress, and I find I have no interest in that. Most men in your position would not make that distinction." "I am aware." He finally looked at her. "I am not like most men in my position." "No," she said. "I'm beginning to understand that." The fire crackled between them. Outside, the garden was waking up. She could hear distant footsteps on the gravel. A gardener beginning the day. "What are you reading?" he said. She looked down at the book in her lap. She had not opened it. "Nothing yet. That one is actually worth reading," he said, nodding at the volume on top of her stack. "The middle section is dense, but the last third is—" He stopped, made a slight face. "I'm recommending books to someone who manages an entire estate alone and reads philosophy for clarity. You don't need my recommendations. I might," she said, "if they're good ones." He looked at her. "The last third," he said again, "is the best thing written on grief in the last century, in my opinion." She heard what was underneath that sentence. She picked up the book. She did not say anything about what she'd heard, and neither did he, and that felt like the most honest conversation she'd had in years. The days that followed built something between them quietly, the way foundations are built, below the surface, without announcement, in the places where the structure would eventually rest. They rode together in the mornings. Not by arrangement, it simply happened that they were both in the stables at the same early hour, and after the second morning it became a pattern neither of them named. She asked him questions that no one apparently asked him. Not about policy or military history or the affairs of the kingdom, but small, precise questions. What did he think about when he couldn't sleep? What had been the last thing that genuinely surprised him? What did he regret? He answered slowly, the way a man answers when he is not used to being asked and is deciding in real time whether to tell the truth. He always told the truth. She noticed that. It was never easy and never performed, but it was always true. She told him about Ashvalale, about the ledger and the east wall and the tenant families, and the years of holding something together with the stubborn conviction that it mattered, even when the world kept suggesting otherwise. She told him about her father, not the parts she'd told other people, the diplomatic version, the graceful version, but the real version. A man she had loved enormously, and who had made terrible decisions, and left her to manage the consequences, and whom she missed with a fierceness that still occasionally ambushed her in quiet moments. Alaric listened without filling the silences. She was beginning to understand that this was one of his great qualities, the capacity to hold space for something difficult without trying to resolve it prematurely. On the sixth evening, they walked in the garden after dinner, because neither of them had wanted to go inside yet, and neither of them said so aloud. They simply both slowed their steps as they reached the door, and then, without discussion, turned toward the garden path instead. The night was cold and clear. Stars above the bare oak trees. Dorian Blackwell came to speak with me today, Zephyra said. Alaric's pace did not change. I know, Cretan told me. He offered to purchase the debt on Ashvale's east wing, she said. He made it sound like generosity. It wasn't. No. She looked straight ahead at the path. He knew the exact amount, to the pound. He knew the name of the creditor and the repayment deadline. She paused. I have not told anyone those numbers since I arrived. I haven't told you. A short silence. No, Alaric said, you haven't. Which means he has access to information he should not have, she said. About my estate. About me. She finally looked at him. Which means someone provided it. Someone with enough reach to investigate a minor northern estate quietly and quickly. Alaric looked at her steadily. What are you thinking? I'm thinking, she said carefully, that Dorian Blackwell wanted me here before you did. That perhaps the portrait was not only my aunt's idea, that perhaps someone helped it reach you. The garden was very quiet. That's a significant accusation, Alaric said. I know. I'm not making it. I'm thinking it aloud because... She stopped. Started again. Because I trust you to hear it without dismissing it. He stopped walking. She stopped too. They stood on the path with the cold air between them and the stars above the oaks and something in his expression that she had not seen before. Not guarded, not controlled, but open in a way that looked as though it cost him something. No one has said that to me, he said quietly, in a very long time. She held his gaze. Said what? That they trust me. She looked at him for a moment. This man who had ended a rebellion in 11 days and looked at a portrait for 47 seconds and agreed to conditions before she'd spoken to them. This man who read books about grief and rose before dawn and answered her questions with the careful truth. Then let's find out what Dorian is actually doing, she said. Together? Unless you'd prefer to manage it alone. I would not, he said. Good. She turned back toward the palace, and he fell into step beside her, and their shoulders were close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cold night air, and neither of them moved away. Cretan's investigation took 4 days. What it revealed was worse than either of them had anticipated. Dorian Blackwell, Marquis of Castern, had been quietly purchasing debt from failing northern estates for 2 years, not to assist them, but to leverage them. Families who could not repay found their lands absorbed into Blackwell holdings through legal mechanisms so carefully constructed that they appeared voluntary. 7 estates in the northern province had already been lost this way. Ashvale was next on his list. But the debt purchasing was only part of it. The other part, the part that made Zephyra's stomach drop when Cretan laid the documents on the table, was a series of letters between Dorian and a man named Harwick, who served as secretary to the Royal Matching Council. Letters that showed Dorian had been monitoring Alaric's search for a bride. that he had identified Zafira as someone useful, her family connection, her estate's vulnerability, her independence making her unlikely to be registered, which meant she existed outside the council's protection. Dorian had not helped the portrait reach Alaric. He had arranged for it to reach him. Because a woman summoned to the palace by a duke was a woman temporarily removed from her estate. And a woman temporarily removed from her estate, with an outstanding debt and an approaching deadline, was a woman whose land could be absorbed while she was 300 miles away and distracted. "He used me," Zafira said. Her voice was flat. Completely flat. The voice of a woman processing something large and refusing to process it loudly. "He attempted to," Cretan said carefully. "He used your interest in me," she said, not to Cretan but to Alaric, to move me out of the way. Alaric was standing very still across the table. She watched him absorb this. Watched the particular stillness of a man who was angry, not the hot, visible anger she'd seen from lesser men, but the cold, structural kind that went all the way down and did not move. "The deadline for the debt," he said to Cretan. 6 days. Settle it. Today. "Your Grace, today, Cretan." "Alaric," Zafira said his name. Both men looked at her. "You will not purchase my debt," she said. Her voice was still flat, but there was something underneath it now. Not anger at him, but something fiercer and more complicated. "I am not a debt to be settled. If you pay it, I become your obligation instead of his, and I will not trade one leash for another. I told Cretan that from the beginning." "This is different," Alaric said. "How?" He looked at her. And in his expression was something that had no armor over it at all. Just the raw, honest answer before he found the controlled version. "Because I am not Dorian," he said. "And I am not asking for anything in return." "No," she said. "But you would have my gratitude and my obligation and my awareness that I could not have managed it alone, and all of those things change what stands between us. I won't have that." She pressed her hands flat on the table. "I need to go back to Ashvile. Zafira, I need to go back," she said. "I need to face this myself. I need to face him myself. That is not a negotiable condition." The room was very quiet. Alaric looked at her for a long time. The anger was still there. She could see it in the set of his jaw, the quality of his stillness. But underneath it was something she recognized because she had seen it in her own face when she looked in mirrors on the difficult mornings. Restraint that costs something. The choice to respect someone even when every instinct argues against it. "Then go," he said quietly. She nodded. She left the room and went to pack and did not let herself feel how much that word cost her until she was alone. She rode out the next morning. Alaric was not at the gate. She had not expected him to be. But Cretan was. He stood beside the road with his hands clasped and his face giving nothing away, and he handed her a sealed letter as she passed. "He wrote it last night," Cretan said. "He asked me to give it to you when you were already moving, so you couldn't argue about it." She looked at the letter, at the seal. "He knows me fairly well," she said, "for a fortnight's acquaintance." "Yes," Cretan said, "he does." She did not open the letter until she was 2 hours north of Velmore, when the palace had dropped below the horizon and the road opened up into the flat grey landscape of midwinter England. She broke the seal with her thumbnail and read it on horseback. There were 4 lines. "The east wall will stand. I have asked a man I trust to look at it, not to pay for it, but to assess it. He will offer you his professional opinion and nothing else. His name is Aldrin. He will arrive Thursday. I do not know what will happen when you return to Ashvile. I know only that I intend to find out. You are not furniture, Zafira. You never were." She read it 3 times. Then she folded it and put it inside her coat, against her chest, where the letter from her aunt had been, and rode the remaining miles home. Ashvale in December was cold and beautiful in the particular way of things that have survived difficulty without being softened by it. She arrived to find Marin waiting at the door with the expression of a woman who has been bracing for news. Zafira hugged her, which was not something she normally did, and went inside and sat by the kitchen fire and told her everything. The next morning she sent a letter to Dorian Blackwell requesting a meeting at Ashvale. He came. Of course he came. Men like Dorian came when they believed they had already won. He arrived with 2 lawyers and the confidence of a man holding all the significant cards, and he sat across from her in the drawing room and made his offer with the warm professional grace of someone doing a favor. He would purchase the debt at a reasonable rate, very reasonable, and in exchange she would sign a land agreement giving Castern Holdings access to the northern road that ran through Ashvale's eastern boundary, the road that connected 6 tenant farms to the market town, the road that, if Dorian controlled it, would effectively give him control of the economic life of those farms. "It's a generous offer," he said. "It's a clever one," she said. "There's a difference." He smiled. The same warm, deliberate smile from the palace dinner. "Lady Zephyra, you are alone here. The debt deadline is in 4 days, and the Duke of Velmore—" He paused, letting it breathe. "Well, whatever brief interest he took in you has not, as far as I can observe, resulted in any material assistance." He watched her face carefully as he said it. She gave him nothing. "I wonder," she said pleasantly, "if you are aware that your correspondence with Secretary Harwick at the Royal Matching Council is currently being reviewed by the Duke's legal office." Dorian's smile did not vanish, but it changed, just slightly. The change of a man recalibrating. "Correspondence is private," he said. "It was," she agreed. "Until you chose to use me as a chess piece on a board I hadn't agreed to sit on." She leaned forward slightly. "You moved me away from my estate so you could approach it unopposed. You manufactured the portrait's delivery. You used his interest in me as a mechanism. And then you came here believing I didn't know any of that." She held his gaze. "I knew all of it before I left Velmore, Lord Dorian." A silence. "The debt," he said, quieter now. "Be more careful. Will be managed," she said. "By me. Without your assistance. In 4 days. Yes, you don't have the funds." "No," she said, "but I have something more useful." She had sent 3 letters the morning after reading Alaric's note. Not to Alaric. To the 3 largest linen merchants in the northern province. Men who used Ashvale's eastern road every market week. Men who would be significantly impacted by Dorian's access agreement. Men who had, over 5 years of honest dealing, come to trust her. All 3 had responded within 48 hours. All 3 had offered, collectively, a bridge loan sufficient to cover the debt and the east wall repairs. Interest terms fair. Repayment structured around the spring market surplus. The road remaining fully under Ashvale control as the guarantee of their investment in its future. She set the signed agreements on the table between them. Dorian looked at them. She watched him understand. Not just the financial reality, but the larger one. That she had built something in this province over 5 years of steady, unglamorous work. And that the thing she had built was relationships. Trust. The kind that held when pressure was applied. "You will hear from my legal office regarding the Harwick correspondence," she said. "I recommend you cooperate." Dorian rose. His face was composed. She gave him credit for that. "You are a formidable woman," he said at the door. "Yes," she said simply. "I know." She was standing in the garden an hour later, looking at the east wall, when she heard hooves on the gravel drive. She did not turn around immediately. She heard the horse stop. She heard a single set of footsteps cross the gravel. She heard them stop behind her, a few feet back, and she knew, the way you know things that your body has catalogued without your permission, exactly who it was. "Cretan said you handled Dorian yourself," Alaric said. "I did. Without assistance." "With assistance," she corrected. "From 3 linen merchants who keep their word." A pause. "You knew I was coming," he said. "I suspected." She turned. He was exactly as she'd last seen him. Traveling coat, dark, slightly windswept from the road, his eyes on her with that full unguarded attention that still caught her off guard no matter how many times it landed. "You were not subtle about it." "I'm not interested in being subtle," he said. She looked at him. "Why did you come?" "Because I sent Aldrin to look at the east wall and I wanted to hear the report myself." He held her gaze. "And because I wanted to see you. Those are 2 different reasons," she said. "Yes," he said. "They are." He crossed the remaining distance between them until he was close enough that she had to look up slightly to hold his gaze, and he looked down at her with everything showing, not the controlled public face, not the ducal mask, but the actual man underneath it, who was apparently not particularly skilled at being subtle about things that mattered to him. "I should tell you something," he said. "Tell me, when you said you were leaving Velmore." He stopped, started again more carefully. "I have been managing things alone for 4 years. I have been very good at it. I have convinced myself it was sufficient." A pause. "It was not. I know that now because the morning you left, I walked into the library and the room was wrong in a way I could not account for until I realized I was looking for you." She said nothing. She breathed. "I am not good at this," he said. "At saying the true thing directly. You're doing quite well," she said quietly. "I want you to come back," he said. "Not because of the portrait or the connection to my mother or any arrangement. Because every conversation we've had has been the most honest I've had in years, and I find that He exhaled. "I find that I am not willing to lose that, to lose you." The garden was very still. Behind her, the east wall stood in the pale winter light, solid and waiting. "I am not easy," she said. "I know. I will not be managed or arranged or decided about. I know that too, and I will not come back to Velmore as a guest," she said. "I have a home, I have an estate, I have people who depend on me." "Yes," he said. "All of that would remain yours. I am not asking you to give up anything." His voice was low and steady. "I am asking you to choose, freely, whatever you choose." She looked at him for a long moment. At the man who had agreed to her conditions before she'd spoken to them. Who had looked at her portrait for 47 seconds and rearranged something in himself. Who had written 4 lines that said, "You are not furniture, Zephyra," because he understood that she needed to hear it more than she needed the debt resolved. "There is something I need to tell you," she said. "Tell me." "I read your mother's letters," she said. "My aunt kept them. She sent them to me along with her own letter." She met his eyes. "Your mother wrote about you. Not about the Duke. About you, the boy who used to sit in the library reading about grief before he had any reason to understand it. Who used to learn things just to be ready for the world." She paused. "She said you had a heart like a deep well, that the right person would have to be patient enough to lower the bucket all the way down." He was very still. "She was right," Zephyra said. "I've been paying attention." His hand came up and touched her face. The same light, questioning touch he'd shown in every other gesture, giving her room to move away. She did not move away. "Come back," he said. "Yes," she said. "I'll come back." He kissed her then, carefully, thoroughly, with the focused attention he brought to everything that mattered to him. She kissed him back with the honesty she brought to everything she chose. The east wall stood behind them, solid now, ready for whatever winter intended. The announcement came 6 weeks later, issued through the Royal Gazette with the Duke of Velmore's seal, and a brevity that said everything. His Grace, Alaric Graves, Duke of Velmore, is pleased to announce his betrothal to Lady Zephyra Vespera of Ashval. The wedding will take place in the spring, at Ashval, at the bride's preference. At the bride's preference. Those 4 words circulated through every drawing room in England, with the energy of something unprecedented, which it was, because dukes did not marry in minor northern estates out of deference to their brides. They married in cathedrals with 600 guests and the full pageantry of dynastic occasions. Alaric Graves married Zephyra Vespera at Ashval on a clear April morning with 43 guests, the 3 linen merchants included, the east wing fully repaired behind them. Her Aunt Mira standing in the front row with her eyes bright and her spine straight in the manner of a woman who has done something irreversible and is profoundly at peace with it. Zephyra wore no borrowed jewels. She wore the pearl earrings that had been her mother's and a dress she had chosen herself, deep green, the color of the library at Velmore, which had become her second home in the months between his question and this answer. Alaric stood at the end of the garden path and watched her walk toward him, and did not bother to arrange his expression into anything useful. She saw his face. She almost smiled. She did smile as she reached him, a real one, the full kind, the kind she gave very rarely and only to people who had earned it. And he caught it the way you catch something you have been waiting for and are almost surprised to find actually arrives. "You're not what I expected," he said softly, echoing their first corridor conversation. "You said that before," she reminded him. "I'll keep saying it," he said, "every time I learn something new." She took his hands. "Then you'll be saying it for a long time," she said. "Yes," he said, "I intend to be." The ceremony was brief and true. Afterward, Mira sat beside Cretan in the garden with the April sun on their faces and a glass of very good wine, watching the Duke and new Duchess of Velmore make their way between their guests, pausing, listening, laughing at something the oldest linen merchant said, and Cretan remarked that in 11 years of service he had never seen the Duke laugh with 43 people watching. "He's not laughing at the people," Mira said, watching Zephyra lean up to say something in Alaric's ear. "He's laughing because she said something true." Cretan watched the Duke's face as he turned to look at his wife. "Yes," Cretan said, "I suppose that is the difference." Mira drank her wine. "It always is," she said. "Some loves begin with portraits and commands and the audacity of distance. Some begin with a woman refusing a summons and a man who found that more interesting than obedience. What endures is not the beginning. It is the choosing. The daily, deliberate choosing of honesty over performance, of trust over control, of the person in front of you over the image you were shown. Zephyra Vespera was never furniture. She was never a resource or a chess piece or a means to an end. She was a woman who held a crumbling estate together with her bare hands and her refusal to break, and she was worth every second of 47. And Alaric Graves, the ruthless Duke, the man the world called cold, had a heart like a deep well. It simply required someone patient enough, brave enough, and honest enough to lower the bucket all the way down. And so the portrait that started everything, painted from memory, sent without a name, carried across 300 miles of winter road, became the beginning of a love that neither of them had planned and both of them had needed. That is the quiet miracle of it, isn't it? That the things which find us are sometimes sent by the people who love us most. That the connections we resist are sometimes the ones we were always meant to make. That a woman who refused to be summoned, and a man who had stopped believing anyone was worth waiting for, could find each other in a corridor and change everything, simply by being honest. Zephyra never stopped being difficult. Alaric never stopped being still. And they were, by every account that mattered, profoundly, completely happy. Some loves begin with a command. Some begin with a refusal. The best ones begin with the truth. If this story wrapped itself around your heart today, if you found yourself holding your breath in that corridor, or feeling the weight of that 4-line letter, or smiling when she finally smiled back at him, then you are exactly who we make these stories for. Welcome to the Duke Royal Tales, where every story is a palace, every love is earned, and every ending leaves you just a little more hopeful than you were before. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel. It costs you nothing, and it means everything to us. Leave a comment below. Tell us your favorite moment from today's story. Was it 47 seconds? The 4 lines he wrote? Or the moment she finally turned around in the garden? We read every single one. Like this video if it moved you. Share it with someone who deserves a beautiful story today. A friend, a sister, someone who has been holding things together with their bare hands and needs to be reminded that being truly seen is not just possible. It is coming. We will be here every week with a new story, new palaces, new loves, new impossible dukes, and the remarkable women who refuse to be impressed by them until suddenly, completely, they are. This is the Duke Royal Tales, and we are so glad you stayed until the end. Until next time, be patient with the people worth knowing. Be honest with the ones who matter, and never, ever let anyone treat you like furniture. With love, always with love, the Duke Royal Tales family.